certainly not least, Evan, who's going to talk to us not only about Central Asia, but about China's relations with other countries on its periphery.
Okay. So shifting to another region of the world, there's so much debate these days about China as a maritime power that we need to remember that China has, for centuries, been a continental power as well. And I guess since Adam gave you a bumper sticker, I'll give you a bumper sticker too. So the bumper sticker for Central and South Asia, which is another way of saying China's continental periphery, is that China, kind of like an aircraft carrier, is having this huge displacement effect. It's introducing all kinds of new dynamics in these regions. But it's also, frankly, having to make choices in its own foreign policy because of contradictions in these regions that it didn't have to make 10 or 15 years ago. And I'll try and illustrate that as I just give you a little tour of China's periphery. So I'll start in Central Asia, then I'll do AFPAC very quickly, and then I'll do India. On Central Asia, up until 1991, of course, these countries were part of the Soviet Union. And so China's relationships in this part of the world were defined very much by its larger relationship with the Soviet Union. And its objectives there were a function of that larger relationship. That has changed utterly since 1991 because independence has made possible cross-border linkages that were simply impossible before 1991. So China's interests in this region, you know them well. It's to tamp down dissent in Xinjiang, in part through cross-border alliances with governments in Central Asia that share China's objectives. There's an energy dimension. And then there's a notion of anchoring Xinjiang into a web of cross-border economic reform. But if you really want to understand the way in which China has become a player in this region, you have to look at it not from a Chinese perspective, but from a Central Asian perspective and flip it. Because until the 17th century, this part of the world was integral to what really passed for a global economy. We all know about the Silk Road. We think of the great caravan trade. After the 17th century, the marginal cost of maritime trade dropped below the marginal cost of continental trade. And in many ways, it's been very difficult economically for this part of the world ever since. And many of the problems that we see in Central Asia today, whether it's poverty or it's underdevelopment or it's dependence on a single point of transit, are a function of that really unfortunate geography. And so China becoming a part of the equation after 1991 had a very powerful effect because it began in important ways to reduce Central Asia's dependence on a single point of transit. So instead of just shipping energy through Russian pipelines controlled by Gazprom and Transneft, you could now ship gas or oil through pipelines from Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan to China. You could do trade across those borders. You could have economic opportunities that were simply unthinkable prior to 1991, and as a result, really bolstered the options and opportunities for Central Asian countries themselves. So I have to tell you, there's a lot of distrust of China in Central Asia for a lot of historical and other reasons. But in very, very interesting ways, Central Asians like China because it is the geographically proximate counterweight to the power that has been the traditional external power that really has dominated Central Asian life for the last 200 to 300 years. And it's created another point of transit that really has reduced their dependence, frankly, on Russia in ways that were not the case before. And so actually, in an inadvertent way, the Chinese would never define their interests the way the United States defines its interests in the region. But the United States has very tangible interests in bolstering Central Asian sovereignty and independence and reducing dependence on a single point of transit. And so in that sense, China is doing things in the region that are very consistent with American objectives. And we can talk about that if you'd like. Just moving, since we don't have too much time, to Afghanistan and Pakistan, so moving south. China has some traditional interests here too, and we tend to forget, especially in all the debate about AFPAC now, that phrase, AFPAC, how long-standing China's relationship, particularly with Pakistan, is. It is a very unique and special external relationship for China. The interests here are similar to the interests in Central Asia. They flow from the border. They flow from problems of security and stability. China with Pakistan, though, of course, has had a secondary interest, which touches its strategic, I don't want to say competition, but its largest strategic relationship with India. And so China and Pakistan have had complementary objectives that a close relationship has allowed them to pursue vis-a-vis India. Putting Afghanistan aside for a